number two, don't let anybody die because there's no money in dead people. So where the money is people who are alive, but they're in nursing home, taking a lot of pills, needing hospitalizations, getting tests and surgeries and procedures. And it's not like healthcare systems want people to be sick, but they need to do what's profitable, or else they can't keep their doors open. They can't pay their employees. So that's just the way the system is set up. And so we need to realize that and take control of our own health so that we don't have to fall into this trap and get sucked into our medical system with pills and surgeries and procedures. So Medicare spending is out of control over here. We're going to be broke in Medicare by 2026. Per capita in the United States, we double, almost triple what the UK spends on healthcare. As a percentage of the GDP in America, this is what the United States economy is. This is percentage of GDP. And look at all these other countries. We tower over everybody else. Yet, you would think we'd be healthy with all the money we're spending. The United States is at the bottom of life expectancy according to the World Health Organization, despite all this money that we spend. It's crazy. So what I tell people, though, is when I have somebody who's obese, diabetic, just had a heart attack, I say, listen, it's not your fault that you're here. It's the fault of these 5 major things. We love sugar, salt, and fat. That's human instinct. That's not your fault, right? The whole motivational triad, seek pleasure, avoid pain, conserve energy, really well written in a book called The Pleasure Trap, phenomenal book. That's not the individual person's fault, right? But then we have our culture that is just the day you turn 1, you get a cake in front of you and you're addicted to sugar, right? And every holiday, it's unhealthy food. Halloween just went by. Halloween candy used to be breakfast, lunch, and dinner for me when I was a kid. The food industry markets to us, they fund research, they confuse us, and it really is a part of the major part of the problem, which is not the fault of the American person. Our government policies, we subsidize sugar, we subsidize corn and soy for animal food, but where are the subsidies for broccoli? And apples, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. We need to shift our subsidies towards those healthy foods. And then, of course, our healthcare systems don't promote prevention of disease because it's a bad business model. That's why America is so sick. What we need to do is change our system so that the food industry, pharmaceutical industry, and the healthcare industry stop profiting from the illness of good American people and start profiting from good health and prevention. That's really what we need to do. And so really culture and money over health is what we have decided as a country to allow happen. All the food that we eat, all these industries that are profiting, and we really need to make a big change. We need to be that change. So I told you heart disease was the #1 cause of death in America. But as you know, it's actually not heart disease. And it's about time we tell the public the truth, because the #1 cause of death and disability in America are dietary factors. Disability as well, dietary factors, over tobacco smoke. So really our diet is the #1 killer in America. It's not heart disease. We should say it the way that it is. The American diet is the #1 cause of death in America. How is there such a disconnect between what we know can prevent disease and reverse disease versus how our medical system really is? Yeah, the money influences are there, but it's culture too. Doctors used to recommend smoking cigarettes. They used to recommend that pregnant people smoke. And you may have seen this one, Dr. Greger likes to show it, blow in her face, and she'll follow you anywhere. Doctors all used to smoke. I actually had a patient who had a cigarette dropped on them by a cardiologist during surgery and showed me the burn wound. This was in the 1970s, early 70s. So conferences used to be, medical conferences were a haze of smoke. Literally, it was horrible. And so, as you know, Surgeon General's warning on cigarettes, 1964. The very next day, your own American Medical Association came out against the Surgeon General's warning, saying extensive research shows smoking in moderation is healthy for you. Healthy for you because of all the sponsorship that they receive from the tobacco industry. Well, fast forward to today, it's the same thing. The doctors are eating foods that cause these diseases, and the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry sponsor and fund the American Heart Association, the American Diabetic Association, and all these different places. So we have the same cultural misperception about what we should be doing. We need to focus on the food now. We've done pretty good with the cigarettes. Now we need to get rid of the animal products and the processed food. So really, this is what I tell patients. The road on the right is taking the pills. It's cloudy, it's no fun. You're gonna have a shorter life, and a poor quality of life. The road on the left, if you eat your plants and you have a good lifestyle, you're gonna have a long life, free of pills. We really need a paradigm shift to a system that is not the acute care model. Short appointments, doctor-only visits, doctors get paid for how much they do, not paid for preventing disease, and the lifestyle is not adequately discussed. We need to have long appointments, an integrative approach. Doctors need to get paid for preventing disease, not get paid for productivity, and lifestyle needs to be the main focus. So there was a really good statement by Dr. Walter Willett of Harvard. He is a very well-known nutrition person. He supports plant-based diets very strongly. And he said that the current path that we have leads towards increasing adiposity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and disability. We're going to have an unfit, socially isolated population stuffed with pills and subjected to frequent palliative procedures. Medical costs will continue to go up, displacing investments in education, parks, and other public infrastructure that we really need to focus on. But an alternative scenario is possible if we take every opportunity to support optimal nutrition and physical activity for our children and everybody to create an environment that encourages healthy options throughout the life. And the results will not just be lower rates of disease and medical costs, but enhanced physical and mental well-being. That's a very well said statement, and that's what we need to focus on. So you know the blue zones, they all ate at least 90% plant-based diets. They didn't smoke, they were physically active. They all consumed large amounts of beans. This is what we need to try to model ourselves into. However, these people did this from the day they were born. Therefore, the foundation for cardiovascular disease is laid down in most Americans already. And that's why going to a 100% plant-based diet is much more effective than what the blue zones did, which is about 90 to sometimes 97% plant-based. So people with chronic diseases already or tried to do advanced prevention, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine recommends 100% plant-based diets. It's so important to know that heart disease starts when you're young. Your arteries are nice and clean. This is called the endothelium, and we need to protect it at all costs. Things damage the endothelium, we can start clogging up with cholesterol plaque by the age of 3. And then by adolescence and adulthood, we're clogging more. As we get older, we clog more and more and more. And then boom, you can get a blood clot that can form and trigger a heart attack. So it's so important to start preventing heart disease when you're young, because the first symptom in 1 out of 4 people of heart disease is sudden death. You don't get a second chance. So preventing it from happening in the first place is so critical. So the artery on the left is a clean artery. The endothelium, this little brown layer, is 1 cell layer thick. Here's a severely clogged artery with just a teeny bit of opening in the middle. Heart attacks don't happen from these. 85% of heart attacks happen from blockages that are 30, 40, 50% that would not necessarily cause you any specific symptoms until boom, you get the heart attack. So that's scary. So if we think about stents and bypass surgeries, look at this. 1.2 million coronary stents per year. 1% of people die during that procedure. That means 12,000 people a year die as a complication from coronary stents. 4% risk of a heart attack during the stent procedure as a complication of the stent procedure. That means we cause 48,000 heart attacks every year by doing stents. When people get a bypass surgery, it's a 3% mortality. That's 15,000 deaths that we cause by doing bypass surgery. We cause another 15,000 strokes. Guess what? Lifestyle medicine, no complications, no deaths, no heart attacks, no strokes. It's so powerful. This is what we need to focus on. So a heart attack happens when the plaque becomes disrupted and you start to form a blood clot, 100% blocking this artery. We really need to focus on the health of our endothelium, the lining of our artery, because if we can prevent this in the first place, then we'll prevent this. So that's what we really need to focus on. What we say about this endothelium is we don't want to injure it whatsoever. The food you eat is the main thing that injures it. And if you do injure it, you'll start getting cholesterol plaque that builds up. The way we really think about it is the body has a natural capacity to heal itself. It wants to be healthy if we just stop injuring it. And the great analogy that I like to show is you can imagine if you have clogging of arteries and inflammation going on in your arteries, it's like your arteries are on fire, right? So the endothelium is on fire. This is the inflammation. Influm as inflame, inflammation. So when you do something unhealthy, you're pouring gas on that fire, you're fueling the flame. If you smoke a cigarette, eat a burger, eat dairy, cheese, saturated fat, dietary cholesterol. So these are the things, oil of any kind, essentially, caffeine, saturated fat, tobacco, smoke products, that pours gas on the fire. However, you could pour some water on that fire too if you're eating fruits and vegetables, beans and lentils, whole grains, herbs and spices. There's 100,000 edible plant-based species. Now we have a really messed up concept in our whole culture, in our healthcare system, that the solution to most of our problems is adding something, that the human body is imperfect, right? So we need to add a pill, we need to add a stent, we need to add a bypass surgery or a supplement. But really, the most powerful thing to do is simply take away the thing that's causing the harm. If you take away the saturated fat, cholesterol, sugar, refined carbohydrates, the tobacco, now you're only pouring water on the fire. And that's all you're doing, and that will put out the flame. Just removing the problem can allow the body to naturally heal up. The analogy is cut your hand with a knife. You do nothing, you'll stop the bleeding, scab over, and you'll form a scar if you do nothing. But if you cut yourself 3 times a day at the same spot with that knife, you're never going to heal up. So remove the cause and the body will heal. One meal can cause damage to your endothelium. Here on the right, you're going to see a fatty meal, a regular animal-based meal. On the left is a plant-based meal. Look how clear the blood is on a plant-based meal. It is very, very apparent that it's crucial every single meal not to let this happen, because this is flowing through your bloodstream, damaging your endothelium when you consume cholesterol, saturated fat, and all those unhealthy things. So it's so important to understand that there are all these risk factors for heart disease, and we think, maybe it's partially genetic, right? 1 out of 500 cases, that's 0.2% is genetic. We have all these other risk factors, but the one that's critical is a cholesterol problem. If your blood cholesterol is high, that is the most important thing for the foundation of developing cardiovascular disease. So if we could just drive our cholesterol down really low, we could be an overweight, obese, sedentary diabetic smoking cigarettes, and we're unlikely to clog arteries. Now, I don't recommend you smoke even if your cholesterol is good, but you get what I'm saying. High cholesterol is the most important thing. Historically, we've said total needs to be under 200, LDL under 100, and the HDL needs to be greater than 50. That's what we say. The LDL is a lousy cholesterol, lethal, we want it low. HDL is healthy, happy, we want it high. And they've always said total under 200. Well, let's look at it from a different perspective. The big Framingham study, 35% of people who had heart attacks had cholesterols between 150 and 200. That's within normal limits. Yet 1/3 of people who had heart attacks in this study had normal cholesterols. So maybe less than 200 isn't aggressive enough. Maybe we need to be less than 150 with a rate of 0. So there was a great publication just 2 months ago in the biggest cardiology journal, a journal of the American College of Cardiology, which developed this concept called plaque years, which I'd like to show you. The average American's LDL is 125. Down here in the lower left corner, we see somebody who's just born, the day they're born. So the age goes over this way up to age 80. The cumulative LDL cholesterol exposure is on this line. So if you take your age and multiply it by your LDL, you're going to get your cumulative exposure. Now, if anybody in the room ever had their cholesterol checked every single year, you'd be able to do your own calculation here. But the longer your LDL is high, your cumulative is going to go up. Your cumulative exposure goes up and up and up. So as you get older and older and older, your exposure goes up and up and up. And if you were 125 for your LDL your whole life, by the age of 40, you'll see over here is when heart attack risk starts to go up. And as you get older and older and older, heart attack risk goes up and up and up and up. So that if your LDL was just 125, which a lot of people don't think is that crazy high, by the age of 80, you have a 16% risk of having had a heart attack. So that's what we call plaque years. Your plaque years, your risk of exposure to LDL. You want your LDL to be as low as possible from as early as possible so that your total plaque burden is as low as possible. This is a great study of a genetic mutation where these people had a genetically crazy low LDL from the day they were born. That's the key. And they were compared to average people who did not have the mutation. If you had this genetic mutation that gave you low LDL cholesterol from the day you were born, your risk of having heart disease was 88% reduced. 88%. just from having a low LDL from the day you were born. So again, the sooner you get your cholesterol down, the better. So much data really shows that the physiologically normal LDL is between 50 and 70. That's the LDL that healthy primates have. That's the LDL healthy neonates, babies, between 30 and 70. So this is really what we should be shooting for, is between 50 and 70. Here shows some clinical trials of trying to prevent heart disease. Each dot represents thousands of patients in the clinical trial. And here's the cholesterol down here. Some clinical trials had crazy high cholesterol, some were in the middle, and some were low. If you were to take this line and look at the risk of heart disease over here, where does this line hit zero? 55 LDL. So if you extrapolate this data out, LDL of 55 will prevent the first heart attack. We could do this for people who already have heart disease as well. These are all thousands of people in clinical trials that have already had heart disease. You extrapolate this line down to an event rate of 0 events, your LDL is 30 if you want to have 0 events. So definitely, if you want to prevent heart disease, the lower you get your LDL, the better. Once you already have heart disease, maybe even lower, such as 30, is better to prevent clogging of arteries. So what did the National Cholesterol Education Program, this is an NIH foundation, say? They said despite the low risk of heart disease accompanying LDL cholesterol levels that are really low, the intensity of clinical intervention required to get levels that low for everybody in the population would financially overload our system. Drug usage would rise enormously. They're assuming drugs are the only way that we can get LDL down, right? But Dr. Esselstyn says the reason for not advocating for lower levels might be able to frustrate the public who would have difficulty maintaining that lower levels. Well, it seems to me that the public's greatest frustration would come from not being informed about the optimal diet for health. So we can get our LDL cholesterols down that low through diet alone, especially if you start early. So here's the numbers we want. Total less than 150, LDL less than 70. And actually, who cares about the HDL? We could talk about it later if you like. We care more not about the number, but about the efflux capacity of HDL. Guidelines for cholesterol goes through all these medications, and they put lifestyle, teeny tiny at the top. It really needs to be the opposite. It needs to be all lifestyle oriented. Because drugs, statins, they might reduce your risk by 20 to 30%. We call that the relative risk of heart attack or stroke within 5 years reduced by 20 to 30%. That doesn't sound huge. It's something, it's better than nothing. But 50 million Americans take statins, and heart disease is still the #1 killer in America. So the average individual normally gets about less than 5% benefit over 5 years from taking these drugs. If you told a person that your benefit from a statin is only 5%, they might not take it. In fact, even high-risk people have less than 5% chance of benefiting from a statin within 5 years. These statistics are very rarely shared with patients because studies like this suggest that if we told patients their chance of benefiting from preventative drug strategies, then they won't take the drugs in the first place. So we should just not tell people, right? That's the way that we work in our current system. We just give the pills and don't tell them, listen, you might get a 5% risk reduction in 5 years from these pills. But with diet and lifestyle, we can get dramatically better results. So only a 3.1% relative risk reduction from a statin after heart attacks. That's minimal, right? That's not huge. But when 50 million Americans take it, that could save some lives on a big population. Individually, a minimal benefit. So what people think, here was a survey that people thought that 53% of patients would benefit from taking a statin, that it would avoid a heart attack after 5 years. That's the perception of people. When in reality, it's more around 3%, maybe 5% at most. So people really they think, I mean, I'm having a statin, I can eat what I want because I'm on a pill for my cholesterol, right? This is a better way to do cholesterol, something we call primordial prevention, preventing the risk factor from developing in the first place. We check our cholesterol levels, and if it's not crazy high, like a genetic cholesterol abnormality, then you do trials yourself, N of 1, meaning number of 1 yourself, individual trials of the optimal diet, which of course is a whole food plant-based diet. And you take this approach to find your optimal cholesterol levels. So that's what we need to do. So cholesterol in your diet increases your blood cholesterol levels, saturated fat does. and so does trans fats. What eliminates all of this? A whole food, plant-based diet, right? Can halt and reverse clogging of arteries. So I tell people there's only 3 main food groups. Processed foods, which includes white bread, white rice, white flour, the refined carbohydrates, and oils, which are highly processed and not healthy for you. The second category is animal-based foods, and the third is whole plant foods. American College of Lifestyle Medicine advocates 100% whole food plant-based diets. So you know that cholesterol only comes in animal-based foods, and there's none in plant-based foods. Lots of fiber in plant-based foods. If you look at it, people think, oh, I give up red meat, which has 72 milligrams of cholesterol in it per 100 grams, and I eat chicken only. But look at chicken. Chicken is just as much as beef almost. And so when you look at other things like egg and egg yolk, it's super high. Seafood, super high in cholesterol. Everybody's different though. Individually, you're going to find differences. The average person absorbs half their cholesterol. Some hardly absorb any. Some absorb a lot. Some hardly absorb any. So individually, it's very different. That some people, as you increase your cholesterol intake, you're going to absorb a different amount. So this is where I'm at. I'm on a plant-based diet. I have 0 cholesterol intake, so I absorb 0, right? Now, the average American eats a lot of cholesterol, so they absorb a lot. But here's what happens. The egg industry and the food industry, they fund research to actually take the average American and move them to here. So they add 2 eggs to the average American's diet. And what's going to happen to how much cholesterol you absorb? You're going to go from here to here. Hardly any more absorption of cholesterol when you add more cholesterol to somebody who already eats a lot. That's why it looks like eating dietary cholesterol doesn't have that much of an effect. But if you took a plant-based diet person, me, and if somehow you could shove 3 eggs down my throat, you're going to find that I'm absorbing a ton of cholesterol, and my numbers are going to go way up because I'm going to absorb so much. So doing research like this, the analogy is, it's like saying, let's compare car crashes at 120 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour, and 80 miles an hour. And we look at these 3 groups and say, look, everybody died in these crashes. Oh, geez, speed must not be a factor as to whether or not you die in a car crash. Speed's not important because everybody died, right? But did they include a 40 mile an hour group or a 10 mile an hour group? No, they didn't. They would see, we drove 10 miles an hour, nobody died. And that's what a plant-based diet is for cholesterol. This guy, Dr. Kim Williams, who you may have met, he said he's the past president of the American College of Cardiology. His LDL was 170. Just after 6 weeks, his LDL went to 90 on a plant-based diet. And he said, I don't mind dying. I just don't want it to be my fault. So for the sake of time, I'm going to go through things a little bit quicker because I would like to make sure that we get to a lot of the Q&A. But the Institute of Medicine says we should eat as little cholesterol as possible. And this says the same thing for saturated fat. We don't need to eat any. Really what the research shows is that any intake above 0 of dietary cholesterol, saturated fat, and trans fats increase your cholesterol levels. So we should consume 0 of those, none. It's just like cigarettes, right? You don't need to smoke to live. They don't say smoke 2 cigarettes, that's okay. Smoke 5, that's okay. No, they say smoke 0. You shouldn't smoke any. So refined carbohydrates are just as bad as animal-based foods. They lack fiber, they have high calorie density, they spike your insulin, they cause diabetes. But look at animal-based foods. They have cholesterol, saturated fat, animal protein, heme iron. They have TMAO, which is atherogenic. They have nitrates and antibiotics, and they increase IGF-1, which can cause cancer. So arguing which one's a culprit in America's problems, refined carbohydrates, which include sugar, or animal foods, it's like saying what's worse, heroin or cocaine. They're both bad. Get rid of both of them, right? And what are you left with? A whole food plant-based diet. The refined carbohydrates, though, are just like eating sugar. It's so important to understand when you're on a plant-based diet. You must avoid all refined carbohydrates at all costs. It's just like eating sugar. And oil, too. I think a lot of people know this, but oil causes endothelial dysfunction. It's super calorie dense, and we need to get rid of it. This was just published less than a month ago, that olive oil actually caused endothelial dysfunction significantly, published by Dr. Vogel, a famous endotheliologist in one of the biggest cardiology journals. Super important that he found olive oil reduced dilation of the arteries by 31%. So olive oil is not healthy. The research about olive oil compared it to butter and animal fats, that's why it looked like it was beneficial. You may have seen this. Oil is very calorie dense. 400 calories fills this much up compared to fruits and vegetables. But this is what Americans eat. Only 12% of calories from whole plant foods and 63% from processed foods, 25% from animal foods. I tell people the more you can get this grain part, the better. Get it to 100% and magic is going to happen. So the American College of Lifestyle Medicine recommends this plate, water to drink only, not dairy. And instead of protein, we recommend legumes because protein is a generic term which can include animal-based proteins. We want plant-based proteins only. Whole food, plant-based diet. You know you can get all your protein, 80 grams of protein if you just eat brown rice and broccoli. And these guys get their protein right. You guys know Aaron Rodgers is mostly plant-based. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Tom Brady, Kylie Irving, strongest man in the world, can bench press 750 pounds. He's plant-based, all these super tennis stars. And this guy ran 2,200 miles of the Appalachian Trail, broke the Guinness Book of World Records, 100% plant-based. So they get their protein from plants. It's important, not a vegan diet. You know this. Vegan junk food is not good for you, but there is a lot of confusion about it because people think, oh, vegan is healthy, but this could be vegan. And this is why a lot of vegans are not healthy. You're doing a disservice to the movement if people eat these unhealthy foods and develop diabetes or obesity or overweight or heart disease. An unhealthy vegan diet for heart disease has the same mortality as the standard American diet. So don't think because you're vegan that you're protected from heart disease. You need to be whole food, plant-based. This burger, Impossible Burger, it's crazy. It's not healthy for you. It's got coconut oil in it, a lot of refined products. So as you know, there's so many great foods that we can eat. A lot of people still think, what the heck am I going to eat if I'm not eating animal food and all these other things? There's so much stuff that we can eat. So, you know, the position of the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the position of the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is plant-based diet appropriate for all stages of life. And I love this guy, Dean Ornish, and I'm going to rush through this just for the sake of time, but he showed reversal of heart disease on a plant-based diet where blockages actually regressed from 61% down to 56% versus control group, which followed the American Heart Association diet, blockages progressed from 61.7% to 64.4% in just 1 year, and there was further benefits after 5 years. So it's so clear that we can not only stop the progression of heart disease, but even reverse it. That's why Bill Clinton follows a almost 100% plant-based diet. I heard he eats fish once every 2 weeks. This guy called Will Esselstyn, I've been to his immersion, phenomenal guy. Followed that up with a lot of great research that actually showed that if you followed his program, which is even stricter, no nuts, no seeds, no avocado, no coconut, no soy products, and no oil, and no caffeine, that you could actually decrease the blockages very similarly, and the disease was clinically arrested in all the patients. This was a small study, so he actually followed it up with a much larger study of 200 people, and the risk of having an event, major cardiac events, was 0.6%. But the people who did not follow the diet had a 62% risk. Huge, huge increase. So it makes sense that plant-based nutrition can really affect the cardiovascular epidemic. And here's an angiogram he likes to show of disease reversal. Within 32 months, you completely normalize this artery. Not everybody gets such dramatic results, but we do get results that are pretty powerful like this. So Dr. Williams has said a whole food plant-based diet is a cure for heart disease. If you're a cardiologist and don't tell your patient about the cure for their disease, that's medical malpractice. You're withholding a cure from your patient, and you can't do that. And he's also said there's two types of cardiologists, plant-based cardiologists, and those who have not yet read the research. We have 21 plant-based cardiologists at Rush, and I'm proud to be one of them. So we say first do no harm, that's the Hippocratic Oath. But do we really know that Hippocrates also said, let the food be thy medicine? So I tell you guys and everybody that I speak to, all the communities, you need to be the change. Nothing's going to change in our healthcare system or our food system unless you speak up and vote with your dollar, focus on your own health first, but then follow together and be the change. Help spread this word. We really need to speak up. That's the one thing you learn is that now, even if you're not a doctor, you can save other people's lives by being very, very, very active in spreading the power of lifestyle medicine. I showed this picture to my 5-year-old son and he just laughed. And he said, Dad, why are these doctors mopping the water up off the floor and ignoring that sink overflowing in the background? Not doing anything to treat the cause of the problem. And that's just the way our system is. We should be shutting off that faucet with all of our efforts. Moving from pills to plants, from the pharmacy to the pharmacy, makes a lot of sense. And truth does pass through three stages. First, it's ridiculed. Second, it's violently opposed. And third, it's accepted as being self-evident. And that's where we're at right now. It's being accepted as being self-evident. But now we accept it. Everybody's accepting it. We need to do something about it. We need to change the culture, change our healthcare system. And that's what we're doing through the plant-based nutrition movement. We now have two main branches opened up, Chicago and Tampa Bay. We have physicians that are working alongside dedicated community members to do cooking classes, immersions, potlucks, activism to spread the word. We've done so many great, powerful things. It's amazing the support that we've had. We're having multiple other cities open up, and we really like to spread this out to bring this skill back to our culture, to help people understand the power of it and take control of their own health. That's really the most important thing that we need to do. And I'd be happy to talk more about what we're doing with our nonprofit organization. Lots of great things, and actually a big fundraiser in April 27th. 5K, springintohealth.org, right in Schaumburg. It's only about an hour and a half drive from Milwaukee, where we have Dr. Joel Kahn and lots of other, I think there's 15 lifestyle medicine physicians that will be doing the walk run with people. And we're going to feed a whole food plant-based lunch afterwards and have physicians give presentations on lifestyle medicine topics at this event. It's going to be a wonderful fundraiser, April 27th, springintohealth.org. So that's my whole presentation, kind of a lot of things to go through quickly all at once, and I'm sorry I wanted to get a lot of it in, but it's such a powerful thing. It's my passion, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or whatever that you have.
Question back here.
Sure.
I know that owns a health food store, and she advocates bone broth. So I don't know.
Can you hear that?
I did. I heard that health food store advocates, and I didn't hear what it was. Okra, was it?
Bone broth.
Bone broth. Yeah. So the thought about bone broth is a couple things. I know they talk about calcium in bone broth. They also talk about collagen and stuff in bone broth. And that's crazy. That's ridiculous. So again, one of the things we always have to come back to is the blue zones. Did the blue zones have bone broth? No, they didn't. These longest living cultures, they didn't have bone broth. And calcium, come on, you can get those from green leafy vegetables. Just like you don't need to get calcium from dairy milk, you get it from green leafy vegetables, and that's the best way. One of the most powerful predictors of cardiovascular events and outcomes nutritionally is the consumption of green leafy vegetables. And so if you're really eating a good amount every single day, not just because of the nitrate power that you can use that protects your endothelium, especially the arugula and some of those other ones, it also will give you all the calcium. So the whole bone broth thing is just there's no good science to support it. What we do, in the whole American College of Lifestyle Medicine and Nutritional Sciences, we still want to do things based on solid evidence. So if somebody could show me a publication where you randomize 1,000 people to bone broth versus 1,000 people with no bone broth and see what happens, then okay, maybe you can convince me of something. But none of that science exists. It doesn't. But the science about eating whole plant foods as a source of all the nutrients that you need is very powerful and very strong. No problem.
Additional questions? Yep, sure.
Does low blood pressure mean you have clear arteries?
That's a good question. Does low blood pressure mean you have clear arteries? No, not necessarily. So that's a complicated question because there are so many different scenarios that the blood pressure could go low from. When people have hardening of the arteries, a lot of calcium buildup, almost like pipe-like arteries, the bottom number, the diastolic number, can go down real low, very low, falsely low. And other things can lower your blood pressure, like when people have advanced heart failure, the heart is so weak, it can't even generate a blood pressure. And that makes the blood pressure low, even though some of these arteries might be clogged like crazy. And so also, a lot of times we check blood pressure in the left arm. If somebody has a severe clog in their left arm artery and we check their blood pressure, it's going to read crazy low. But the reason it's reading low is because it's severely clogged and there's not a lot of blood flow. And so no, really, how clean your arteries are is not directly correlated with having a very, very low blood pressure. However, if you don't have hypertension, if you're able to keep your blood pressure healthy and low from a young age, overall your risk of clogging arteries will be lower. if you have a normal blood pressure versus somebody who has a higher blood pressure. But just because the pressure is low, like right now, doesn't mean your arteries are clean, if you understand what I'm saying.
And one more question.
Sure.
What test can you use to find out whether your arteries are clear?
What test can you use to find out if your arteries are clear? Well, there's a lot of different tests. One good one is called the calcium score. It's a quick CT scan, no IV needed. It takes less than a minute, quick in and out. You can actually gauge how much calcium is built up in your arteries and give a score. You want a score of 0, a score of greater than 400 puts somebody at high risk. So that's a quick, easy way. Of course, stress testing can tell us if arteries are clogged as well. But we only do stress tests if we think somebody might be having symptoms of possible blockage, what we call angina. Other things you can do is there's a test called a CRP, a C-reactive protein that you can do. And there's other advanced cholesterol panels. There's one called lipoprotein(a) that you can do. And you can actually do genetic testing as well for heart disease risk through something called the Cleveland Heart Labs. They actually have very good, very powerful series of tests that you can get for advanced heart disease detection.
I just mentioned too, the calcium CT scan, they do it at, they do it at the hospitals here. You usually have to pay out of your pocket, but it's about $150, as Dr. Lome mentioned, very quick.
Yeah, you can sometimes find them for as cheap as $50 in certain places, but usually they're around $100. And it is really a good, it's a good scan. It's a good idea. If you already have heart disease or diabetes, there's no point because you're already high risk. But for those medium risk people that have never had a symptom and you want to see what's going on, that's the population that benefits from a calcium scan. There's actually a documentary you can watch on YouTube. It's called The Widowmaker, and it goes really well through how stents and bypasses developed and how calcium scoring was ignored for a long time because it was a preventative measure which didn't make money. It's called The Widowmaker. Yes?
Could you explain the TMAO issue?
Yeah, absolutely. Trimethylamine oxide is a very, what we call atherogenic molecule, meaning it can damage the arteries quite a bit and contribute very much so to the development of cholesterol clogging. TMAO is actually a blood test that was first developed by Cleveland Clinic, and they still hold a patent. They're the only ones that could actually measure it in your bloodstream. And it is something that actually is a metabolite of your microbiome, the gut bacteria. And very much so, the microbiome that is selected for when you eat a heavy animal-based diet, meaning if you eat a lot of animal-based foods, you select for the bacteria in your gut that can help produce TMAO from your diet. So the what they've done is, not only have they shown that the animal-based people who eat animal-based foods have higher TMAO levels, shown that, but they also have shown that if you take a plant-based diet and then you measure the TMAO level and it's low, and you feed them a bunch of meat for a day, their TMAO level does not go up because they don't have the microbiome in their gut. And so that's why these blue zones, which may have had meat only once a week, did not develop TMAO levels that were high, didn't clog their arteries up. However, if you eat animal products on a regular basis, you create more of this TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, which is more atherogenic. So how do you get the levels down? Of course, eat plant-based and it'll go down. If you look at the publications that are published in major journals, what do they say? Oh, TMAO looks like it could be a great target for drug therapy. Maybe we can find a pill that blocks TMAO. That's what the scientific community is always thinking. That's not the solution. Eat plant-based and the TMAO level will go down. But that's kind of sad the way we think about things. Any other questions? Yes.
How long does it take to get your arteries nice again after eating a sad diet? How long did it take you? Is there hope for those of us who didn't have any idea about plant-based diet until recently?
Absolutely, there is hope. And that's a great question, by the way. Better late than never, they always say for sure. So the clogging of arteries starts when you're really young. So it's going to take decades and decades to build up. So you cannot expect it all to melt away within a year or two. You look at the Ornish data at 1 year and at 5 years, you may have had at most 10% decrease in your plaque burden. So a small amount. If you look at somebody named Nathan Pritikin, who was one of the founding fathers of lifestyle medicine and plant-based nutrition. He had severe angina in his 40s. He was debilitated. He didn't have stents and bypasses or anything back then. He didn't even have good medication. But he knew animal-based data about diets and reversing clogging of arteries. He knew the cultures that ate plant-based didn't clog arteries, so he changed himself to a whole food plant-based, no oil diet. Within 2 weeks, his angina went away, within 2 weeks. And that's a different phenomenon because the microvasculature opens up quickly when you go on a plant-based diet, especially an Esselstyn-style diet. However, he developed this whole predicate longevity center, got all these doctors on board. He had this huge, great program and got a lot of people motivated, inspired Dean Ornish, inspired Caldwell Esselstyn. But he said that when I die, he wanted his autopsy to be published in the New England Journal of Medicine to show everybody in the world what his arteries looked like after having severe heart disease. And it actually showed he had minimal plaque buildup in all arteries in his entire body. The pathologist report said the near absence of atherosclerosis in a man 69 years old is remarkable. He died from leukemia, which he had prior to actually developing heart disease in his 40s. So he was able to reverse his disease entirely. It's one case. It was published in New England Journal of Medicine, though. One case, and he was on his diet for 30 years. 30 years. So theoretically, it might take as long as 30 years to completely clean things out if you believe that one case. But more importantly is halting progression and stabilizing the plaques so that you don't rupture one and trigger a heart attack. And if you can get your blood cholesterols down super low, like I showed you, total under 150, LDL under 70, and don't do anything that inflames your arteries, like eating, even once in a while, the animal-based foods, the oils, those things, that one meal can trigger a plaque to rupture. That's all it takes. I actually had one patient, one person who I gave a talk to like this, and he stood up and said, I had a heart attack, I had a couple of stents, I went on Esselstyn's program for 5 years, and I got off of it just one day. I ate some meatballs, and guess what happened? I had chest pain, and they said I had a small heart attack. It's just one meal. It's crazy how that can happen. And it's sad that that's how it can happen. But when you have the crazy foundation already built up of severe clogging, it only takes one event. And that's why Esselstyn is so strict. Not a drop of oil. You're going to lose from your vocabulary. Oh, this little bit won't hurt. No, he won't let that happen. You got to be all in all the time. If you want your event rate to be 0, then you need to not eat those foods that can inflame your arteries at all. Any other thoughts or questions?
Yeah, I've got one quick one just to go to the whole other end of this. You've got 6 youngsters.
Yeah.
The vegan journey with your kids.
Yeah, sure. Actually, it wasn't that hard. First of all, 4 of them, the youngest ones, they had no choice. They didn't know any different, right? So you just kind of feed them and they grow up. So really it was more with the 2 older ones. I believe they were 9 and 7 when we transitioned to a plant-based diet. And so what a lot of people do, especially with kids, is you start with transition foods, right? So you're using the soy hot dogs, the Impossible burgers. There's a company called Gardein, which makes frozen nuggets and stuff. But if you look at the ingredient list, there's like 50 ingredients, there's oil. It's definitely not a healthy food. But you could use transition foods in the meanwhile as you're gaining your own skills and getting their palates changed over to more whole plant foods. And so, young people, they don't really understand. Why is it that we're doing this? Why is it so important for my health at this point in time to eat healthy, whatever? I feel fine. They don't really understand that, but you need to try to emphasize it and don't go overboard because they might get an eating disorder or something when they grow older. But so one of the things, like my daughter, it was so much easier to just say, hey, listen, I'm telling you that eating animal-based foods is not healthy for you. It can clog your arteries. I'm a heart doctor. Please believe your dad. Now, having said that, do you like animals? Well, yeah. Are animals your friend? Yeah, animals are your friends. Well, do you eat your friends? No, I don't eat my friends. Well, then don't eat animals. You don't want to eat your friends. So that, with the kid, they understand that aspect of it more. And so why not? It's an important thing to have your kids grow up being compassionate, caring people for all forms of life. And so really that aspect of it was helpful for the children to get them to understand that they don't want to harm animals. So really, as the more and more and more we've done this, they are essentially whole food, plant-based, no oil, at least 6 days out of the week. The 7th day, they may end up getting Chipotle, which has some oil in it, but they're getting the bean burrito, their brown rice, they put oil in their rice. And so, it sneaks in there, but breakfast and lunch, they're always whole food, plant-based, no oil. Every once in a while they sneak in there, but they're athletic, they're thriving, they're brilliant. My son, who's 10, has won multiple kids triathlons. He did a 5K in 20 minutes, which is really fast for a 10-year-old. He's very athletic, and he thinks, he's convinced that the reason he's so athletic is because he eats whole food, plant-based. And I love it. I love it. Let him keep thinking that, and he spreads all that to all of his friends. He's got a couple of his friends to really think about it, and then their parents call us up, and you think that they call us up and say, what is your son telling our kids? But no, they've called us up and said, hey, this is interesting. Tell us more about it. So we've actually converted so many people. You wouldn't believe. It's great.
And they, I imagine their sickness and allergies and things like that are relatively minimal.
Yeah, absolutely. So they don't get sick often at all. Actually, I can't even remember the older two, like the last time either of them were sick with a cold or a sniffle. And allergies, no, they don't have any major allergies. My son did develop a cashew, pistachio, walnut allergy before we went plant-based, so we have to avoid those, which is a little bit of a challenge on a plant-based diet. But I try to follow Esselstyn, which has no nuts in it, so it's a little easier. Yeah.
One more.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but Esselstyn says that he's so rigid that he doesn't want to require his patients to do exercise on top of it all. But obviously you exercise, so there was very little in exercise in any of those quotients as far as results.
Right. So that's a great question. So here's the way I think about that. The Ornish lifestyle program did include exercise, and he had pretty dramatic disease reversal. Esselstyn did not include exercise, and he still had dramatic disease reversal. So I'm not thinking that exercise is the key component to it. It's certainly helpful. All the data on exercise and cardiovascular benefit are on people eating standard American diets, right? So if you're overweight or obese and eating a standard American diet, exercise is very helpful to offset all the excess calories and things that you're doing, and you can get a benefit, right? However, if you're whole food, plant-based, no oil, is that really as much benefit? Well, that data is not there. So the way, again, I always circle right back to the blue zones because it's an unbiased way. Did the blue zones run on treadmills or ride bikes or swim in the pool or do strength training? They did not. They were constantly physically active with a slow perpetual motion. Hence, if you've ever seen a crazy Dr. Michael Greger interview, what is the guy doing during all of his interviews? A slow walk on the treadmill. A slow walk. Not running. He's not sweating. He's just constantly moving. And he says that he averages walking 17 miles a day. Well, that's a lot. But, I don't think the Blue Zone did quite that much. So, I don't advocate that people have to go to the gym or do crazy exercise, but you need to stay physically active as much as you can intermittently throughout the day. If that means walking 3 times a day for 30 minutes, 3 times, just regular walking, great. If you have to go out running and doing marathons, no, absolutely not. If you're on a plant-based diet. Now, if you're on a standard American diet, now, you have to go to the gym. Sorry, you have to compensate slightly, only slightly compensate for all the unhealthy food you're eating. You're going to have to get on the treadmill and work really hard. But even that's only going to lower your risk by a small percentage because you can never out exercise an unhealthy diet. I tried it, and it doesn't work. So.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lome, for this talk tonight.
No problem. It's my pleasure. I absolutely love talking to communities. And I certainly would love for anybody that's interested to be involved in PBM in any way possible. If you guys are interested in cooking courses, immersions, doing a full-day immersion. We have 8 of them, one for heart disease, weight loss, diabetes, plant-based kids, brain health, autoimmune disorders, and plant-based athletes. We have 22 different cooking classes that we have a whole chef certification program that we're getting people certified by our organization. They'll actually go out and be active and teach courses. And we're doing lots of other potlucks and other social gatherings. We love to spread to the Milwaukee area as well. So got to spread the good word and make a difference. So I appreciate you, everybody, having me here. And feel free to contact me through pbnm.org anytime and ask questions. I always take questions from people through there. So thank you.